Hello, my name is Sean Pasquale. I'm the Chief of Police. I want to thank everyone for attending this afternoon, and particularly our panelists who are going to be involved with conducting this exchange of information. And I think when we talk about crime, particularly when we talk about domestic violence, any type of crime, one of the biggest keys towards moving together is communication. And I think that's exactly what we're doing today, is the communication. We have elected officials in the audience who Sonia will identify in a few minutes. But I think that it's important with all of the law enforcement programs we have in place. We've had some great success over the last 3 years combating domestic violence. I think last year we're down about 30% in our domestic violence cases. We had our domestic violence walk just a few weeks ago, and in the past 3 years we're at the lowest rate of domestic violence in the city. Obviously, one case is one case too many, but we are working in the appropriate way. We're working with victim witness advocates. We're working with mental health clinicians. We're working with NGOs to get the message out. And this is just once again, just another example of the communication that takes place for us to all create a synergy to work in the same environment, in the same direction. With that, Sonia, I'd like to turn it over to you. You have members in the audience that we wish to recognize for taking time out from their busy day. This is an important topic. And again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Chief. We're really pleased to be able to have such a strong partnership with our police department, and it continues to be shown throughout the year in the meetings that we hold here for so many of our events and our regular monthly meetings. So we really appreciate this being one of our homes for our work. I do want to express my a deep appreciation to Mayor Curtatone, who continues to show the support to the work that we do in the Commission for Women. We housed our vigil event here, and he really spoke to a lot of our work, our concerns, and he continues to want us to dig deeper, and that's how we end up with events like this, focusing on different communities so that we can really highlight what is happening and what we can do to improve the work that so many of our allies are doing. I also want to thank Mayor Christensen from Malden for coming out. I really appreciate you coming and showing your support. Thank you. And Chief of Police of Malden, thank you so much for coming out with us. We have as well Representative Denise Provo from the Cambridge-Somerville area. Thank you, Representative Provo. And Chief Pasquarello as well, and Deputy Chief Fallon as well. Thank you for coming out. And we have many agencies that continue to show their work here through the anti-violence task force that we have, the high-risk domestic violence team that is housed here in this room. We have the partners that are doing so much work that are cross-city. They do Cambridge and Somerville and outside of the community as well. So we just appreciate all your agencies coming. Representative Shortino staff is also here, so thank you so much. And so first I'd like to do is introduce our first speaker, Sean McMaster. He earned his master's degree in public affairs, summa cum laude, from the McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies at the University of Massachusetts. Sean's graduate school research focused on the efficacy of court-mandated batterer intervention programs and on equitable policing in Muslim communities. His graduate school thesis was entitled "The Preparedness of Local Law Enforcement to Address Domestic Violence in Muslim Communities in a Post-9/11 Society." It's a case study of Middlesex County, Massachusetts. Sean is the Vice President of the Melrose Alliance Against Violence and a Commissioner on the Melrose Human Rights Commission. Sean is the Director of the Community Partnerships at the Middlesex District Attorney's Office. He has worked in the MDAO for 12 years. Sean joined the office in 2001 as a court-based victim witness advocate. He just continues to show the work that he does throughout his entire career, and we're just pleased to have Sean being housed here today to give his presentation. So thanks a lot, Sean.
Thank you, Sonia. I just wanted to thank the Women's Commission, the Mayor of Somerville for hosting today's event. Again, did want to recognize Mayor Christensen from Malden for being here, Chief Molis from Malden, and Representative Provo. Where did she go? Oh, she's in the back there, who has really been an advocate on Beacon Hill for issues of domestic violence in terms of prevention and advocacy. So I think it's really important that we not just have advocates here today, but we have policymakers as well, because a number of the recommendations that I make as part of this research is really focused on policy. I did want to say, I know some of you know me in a professional capacity working in law enforcement, and even though as a public official you can never take off that hat, I'm actually here presenting today as an independent researcher. So this is research that was done for obtaining my master's degree at the McCormick Graduate School at UMass. So these are recommendations that I put forth as an individual researcher. So I think the first thing I wanted to say is that, or acknowledge, is that in coming into this research, by no means did I believe that domestic violence is more prevalent in Muslim communities and in Muslim relationships. And in the aftermath of my research, I don't believe that either, but I think it's an important acknowledgement as to why I'm doing this work and what the impetus for the research was. And that really is focusing on the barrier that victims of domestic violence from Muslim communities face in this post-9/11 society, which I will talk about. The reality is domestic violence doesn't discriminate. I know we have a lot of advocates in the room who are well aware of that. And regardless of religious affiliation, a perpetrator of domestic violence may use religious doctrine, whether or not it's Christianity, whether or not it's Islam, whether or not it's Judaism, to perpetrate abuse by twisting religious doctrine. So again, I just thought it was important. I didn't want anyone to think that I think the issue of domestic violence occurs more readily in Muslim relationships, because that's not the case. So first, let's look at the policy implication of domestic violence, or implications. As you can see, domestic violence touches upon a number of related policy issues. The two on which I focus are crime policy and immigration policy. Now, I know that there are advocates in the room, but for those who don't work daily in the domestic violence services field or the prevention field, I think it's important to at least define domestic violence. This definition is from the Department of Justice. I like it because it's a real all-encompassing definition. Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another intimate partner. Domestic violence can be physical, sexual, emotional, economic, psychological actions or threats of actions that influence another person. This includes any behaviors that intimidate, manipulate, humiliate, isolate, frighten, terrorize, coerce, threaten, blame, hurt, injure, or wound someone. A person who is Muslim is an adherent to the faith of Islam. There are 1.2 billion Muslims worldwide. The highest population of Muslims is in Indonesia. There are 2.35 million Muslims estimated to live in the United States. About 65% are immigrants. Massachusetts has the 9th largest Arab population in the United States. That number can be a bit deceiving because we do have to recognize that in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were a number of Syrians and Lebanese individuals who came to the United States who are actually Christian. But if you look at the number of mosques, there are actually 39 mosques in Massachusetts, which means that Massachusetts has more mosques than 36 other states. So again, the population, I think, is much higher than people might think. The majority of Muslims living in Middlesex County, or the majority of Muslims living in Massachusetts, reside in Middlesex County. A little bit about Middlesex County. There are 1.5 million residents in the county. It's the largest and most populous county in Massachusetts. It's the 23rd most populous county in the United States. There are 54 towns and cities. It's geographically diverse. It's economically diverse, and the demographics make the county extremely diverse. You have urban settings like Somerville, like Malden. You have some suburban settings that are highly affluent, like Weston, Lexington, and Winchester. You also have some very rural settings like Pepperell and Dunstable, where people still work farms. There are also 26 colleges and universities, which most people don't know. So very, very large county, and that's the setting in which I conduct this research. That's a map of Middlesex County. As you can see, it does not include Boston. So again, being the most populous county, it doesn't include Boston. If you look at Muslims in Middlesex County in terms of countries of origin, this is where we tend to see people coming from. Algeria, Bangladesh, Eritrea, Ethiopia, India, Morocco, Pakistan, and Somalia. One factor when trying to ascertain the number of Muslims living in Middlesex County and in the United States is that we have to realize that the U.S. Census data does not focus on religion. So we really have to look at other types of factors, countries of origin, and the reasons that particular populations may have left certain areas of the world, which may result from, political unrest, social turmoil, and other factors, and really trying to identify the Muslim population. That 2.35 million estimate was put forth by the Pew Research Center. That was a scientific study that it did that is probably the most comprehensive figure that we have in trying to estimate the population. But again, the data does not, from the Census Bureau, does not focus on religion. So when looking at the issue of domestic violence as a social problem, there are obviously barriers that all victims of domestic violence face. These are universal barriers to disclosing abuse and accessing law enforcement. The two primary ones are love of the abuser, fear of the abuser. Obviously, family, having children in common is a barrier. Embarrassment, shame, lack of economic self-sufficiency, embarrassment, nowhere to go. There's a number of factors that all victims of domestic violence face, irrespective of race, religion, sexual orientation, or any other identifying factor. Immigrant victims of domestic violence face an immigrant-specific barrier that is unique across immigrant populations. Biggest one being fear of deportation, and then, of course, the fear of the police. And that's because in a number of countries, the police may be corrupt, they may be prone to bribes, so in a lot of countries, they're not seen as being helpful, they're seen as being more adversarial. So that, again, is a barrier that immigrants face on top of those universal barriers. Then, of course, there are the cultural specific barriers that are unique to a particular culture or a particular country. Muslim victims of domestic violence face those three barriers in addition to a distinct barrier that has been brought on by what I refer to as the post-9/11 society. So this is a society in which we've seen the rise of anti-Muslim sentiments. We've seen this in the form of a racialization of a religion, the stigmatization of Muslims as being terrorists or terrorist sympathizers, and in federal laws and policies that make it difficult for victims to access law enforcement. It's one thing for law enforcement to be available, it's another thing for people to feel comfortable contacting the police or accessing the courts. One key informant from a Muslim community with whom I spoke said, "The idea of bringing the police into your house before may have been for one issue, domestic violence, but now there is an overarching issue. Once the police and the government get into your life, they're going to try and bring things that are related to 9/11. There is a sense of being under attack in the community." So in terms of this being a social research problem, a few things we have to focus on. The first is that policing is a public service. It's a function of government, and with any government service, it has to be equitable. I'm going to talk about equity as we go on. Equitable meaning fair. Muslims of victims of domestic violence are really marginalized in two ways. The one is because of their status as immigrants, and two, because of this post-9/11 effect, which I'll talk about. So the first thing I did was look at the literature that exists, and there really was no literature that focused on the impact post-9/11 on victims of domestic violence. There was a lot of literature that looked at the impact that this post-9/11 society has had on the Muslim population in general. That focused a lot on this post-9/11 environment where Muslims may tend to self-isolate, not just isolate themselves from society in general, but even closer to September 11th, 2001, from their own communities, not wanting to necessarily be out in the community for fear of being harassed or in some cases even harmed. The rest of the literature really looked at community policing. And what was interesting about the community policing literature is it focused on really two things. One, community policing to prevent hate crimes in the aftermath of 9/11, so efforts to protect Muslim residents. And the second really focused on community policing in an effort to build trust. And actually, there's three. And the third component was community policing to work collaboratively with leaders of the Muslim community to try to identify individuals who may be sympathetic of Al-Qaeda or other terrorist organizations. So that's really where the focus was on. The concern, though, is that community policing, if it's seen as being surveillance, whether or not that's the intention, can really have a counteractive effect. And that being that if the purpose of community policing is to make people feel comfortable and safe, it's not going to be interpreted as that unless there's been some initial dialogue with local mosques and Islamic centers and other leaders in those communities to make sure that people understand why the police are out and about. So that was one of the concerns about the literature that focused on that part of community policing, is that the community policing was often misinterpreted to think that people were under surveillance. So because there was really a lack of literature devoted to the impact on victims of domestic violence who were Muslim, and a lack of literature on law enforcement's preparedness to respond to it, the topic is one that is really under-investigated and poorly understood. So because of that, the research question that I prepared is, what is the preparedness of local law enforcement in Middlesex County to address domestic violence in Muslim communities in a post-9/11 society? And I defined preparedness as the extent to which municipal police departments are willing and able to provide cultural competent assistance and services to victims pre- and post-complaint. So this really suggests that policing has to be dualistic. And what I mean by that is if you're a police department and you have very robust outreach efforts, that in and of itself is not going to be enough. If you're a police department and you've embraced cultural competency in various forms, such as training and other policies and procedures, that's not going to be enough. And the reason for that is if you're a department that has done a lot in the community to attempt to break down barriers, that doesn't say anything about whether or not you are prepared to respond to domestic violence if you receive a call. So it's one thing to break down barriers, it's another thing to be prepared. Similarly, it's one thing to have policies on the books, it's another thing to ensure that people are accessing police. So they're really mutually dependent on one another. There needs to be this front-end approach to break down barriers so that people feel comfortable accessing the police. And then on the back end, there needs to be the policies and procedures in place to ensure that cultural competent policing is operationalized. There tends to be either one or the other, and again, they're dependent on each other. So what I did is I conducted a qualitative research study, a case study of 5 police departments in Middlesex County. The reason I chose qualitative methods over quantitative methods is I'm concerned about the issue of preparedness. So that goes to the attitudes and beliefs of those being interviewed, of the respondents that I spoke with. I spoke with 5 police administrators. For the police departments, I should note that, that 3 of the departments were urban police departments and 2 of the departments were suburban police departments. The reason for that is I wanted to make sure that the results were generalizable to Middlesex County. Again, that goes back to the profile of Middlesex County, it being very diverse in a number of ways. So I had to make sure that, I had respondents who were representative of the community at large and of the police departments, recognizing that police departments, you know, in urban settings are different than police departments in rural settings. And another thing too, noting that the communities that I look at, each department has, or each community has a different primary population of Muslims living in those communities. So none of the communities mirror one another. And again, that's important when you're looking at a community or a region that is large and diverse in nature. So with the police administrators, 4 of them were chief administrators of their departments. 1 was second in command at his respective department. I spoke, and I should say that 4 of the 5 have master's degrees. For the domestic violence detectives, 4 of the 5 were females, or are females. And the key informants, I spoke with 3 community-based social service providers from Muslim organizations, again, to make it generalizable. These key informants are from different social service organizations that provide services to different groups of Muslim victims. So we have an organization that works specifically with South Asian victims, an organization that works specifically with African victims, an organization that works specifically with Arab victims. So those were the key informants from the social service providers. In addition to that, I also interviewed an imam, and I interviewed the former president of an Islamic center. I also conducted 2 focus groups, one with prosecutors and one that included prosecutors and victim witness advocates from the district attorney's office. With these focus groups, the assistant district attorneys and the victim witness advocates had to either currently work in one of the communities that were selected for this case study, or would have had to have formally worked in one of those communities. And then I had a focus group with civilian domestic violence advocates. So these are advocates who work for domestic violence programs, local-based programs. So not programs that necessarily work exclusively with Muslim victims. Again, those are my 3 key informants that I spoke about earlier. But those from some of the mainstream, domestic violence programs that operate across the state. I also looked at all of the police department's domestic violence policies, and I compared it with the state domestic violence policy of the Executive Office of Public Safety. So this was a document analysis component of my research. So there were really 6 key themes. There's a number of themes, and I think Sonia probably afterwards will provide you with information if somebody is interested in the actual study itself, which is lengthy, but if you're interested in the entire research study, and I can also provide you with a copy of the abstract. But the 6 themes, first one, and this is in no particular order, is there's really this mutual fear that exists between Muslims and police officers. So it's not just police officers being afraid of Muslims. All of the detectives that I interviewed expressed that they were afraid of interacting with the Muslim community, fearing that they may be accused of being racist or being insensitive. So again, this mutuality of fear. As one detective said, I think everyone is afraid of dealing with them. There is a fear of profiling after 9/11. Another key finding is language barriers. Now, each of the 5 police departments have access to a language line where they can contact an interpreter via telephone 24 hours a day. The concern with that is there's little understanding as to who is on the other on the other end of the phone. And the concern being that it could be somebody from their local community. It might be somebody who knows them, it might be somebody who's friendly with the abuser, it might be somebody who is from a village that they came from in a particular country. So there's that concern of who's on the other end of the phone. The other concern is one individual mentioned who is Muslim, is that there is this, what she described as 2 degrees of separation within the Muslim community, that someone described it as being incestuous, is that most people know each other, or the family, and you have some relationship, even if it's not by blood, it might be by marriage, or again, you came from the same area of a particular country. So for court-based interpreters, it's not unusual for that to be a local person, generally it is because they work here in Massachusetts, from that same community. And during the focus group with prosecutors and victim witness advocates, we saw this play out in 2 ways. The first was during a court recess, an interpreter was seen out in the hallway commiserating with the abuser. So there was some relationship. I'm not sure exactly what the relationship was. The second is that there was an interpreter who did not interpret accurately. And the prosecutor was unaware of that until afterwards. There was a community-based advocate from the same country as the victim who approached the prosecutor afterwards and said that the interpreter was not interpreting accurately, and the interpreter was minimizing what happened, saying that the person was using abusive language as opposed to hitting the victim. So again, the language barriers are of concern, and what we've seen too is, challenges that police departments have, and we have to think about the difficult environment in which police officers respond. They're thinking about their safety. Their primary concern is obviously the safety of the victim and the children. It can be a very chaotic environment. So going into that setting and trying to determine what happened can be hard if you don't have a quick ability to communicate with someone. So what we've seen is that police officers sometimes have used family members or children. The concern with family members, especially in South Asian Muslim communities, is that the victim tends to reside with the family of the abuser. I know we'll hear from Sahili later, but it is normal to stay in that household and take care of the parents until they get older. And you're actually marrying into that person's family. So if the police respond, it's normal to refer to the father-in-law as father, or the mother-in-law as mother, or the abuser's aunt and uncle as auntie and uncle, and that can be interpreted by the police as being somebody who's supportive of the victim, being the victim's mother or father, or the victim's aunt or uncle, when in reality it is somebody who's related to the abuser and is oftentimes interfering with the report and trying to prevent their loved one from being arrested. Focus group participants said, in a lot of cases, the abuser speaks some English and can present, and the victim doesn't speak much, if any, English. So aside from all of the cultural issues, there are the logistics of somebody not being given the opportunity to tell their story in their own language. Excuse me for 1 minute. Another key finding was the secondary abuse that tends to be committed by sometimes the victim's family herself, oftentimes the abuser's family, and sometimes the community at large. And that tends to arise from victims who don't follow culturally accepted avenues for reporting abuse. Typically, and again, it can differ based on the relationship and the country of origin, but typically what we see is that there's a certain roadmap that somebody is supposed to follow. The first would be talking about it with the abuser's family first, trying to address it with the abuser's mother or father. If that doesn't work, then talking to your family, your mother or father. In some cases, a community elder might be called upon to mediate, somebody who is respected in the community. We tend to see that a lot with African countries. And then the final authority is really the imam, the religious leader. Now, one of the key informants I interviewed was an imam, And he said that you don't necessarily have to follow that order, but it is required that people get help. He said, fear God, get help. But generally, again, there's these culturally accepted recourses for dealing with abuse. Picking up the phone and calling 911 without trying to have it addressed by some other means can have consequences for the victim. It may have consequences for their safety. It might have consequences for their family, whether or not their family lives in the United States, particularly if their family still lives overseas. They may be harmed. They may be threatened. And it's a real concern when the victim has children who are with family or the abuser's family living in their native country. So again, this secondary abuse is really unique in that it's not just abuse being perpetrated by the abuser. One focus group participant said, instead of being afraid of one person, you're afraid of many. Budgetary constraints is a big one, and I know the police departments are certainly aware of this. The state mandates a certain amount of police training each year. It was 32 hours. Historically, it's up to 40 hours this year. Police departments are mandated to put so many hours into training for specific topics, defensive tactics, firearm safety, CPR, first aid. So that takes up a lot of what police departments are required to do. They have very little flexibility to offer any other type of training. It's usually 8 to 12 hours. So there's not really the ability to do specialized training. And think about all the topics that exist where a police department might benefit or may even want specialized training. There's the limited availability of that. But going back to the budgetary constraints is that police departments are essentially on their own to cover the costs of training. So that's very difficult for departments in tough economic times. When there isn't, so there's a state mandate that imposes these training requirements, but it's an unfunded mandate. So departments are having difficulties. The other challenge that departments face is that with local cuts to municipal police budgets, what tends to go first is training monies. It's a line item that tends to be cut first. And then when you look at just the costs of training, one of the suburban police departments conducted a 4-hour block of specialized training for 64 officers. The cost of that was $18,000. That was just backfill in order to make sure that there's officers on the street because there's a mandatory requirement having so many officers on the street at all times, and overtime costs. That's 20% of that department's training budget. So again, real challenge. I mean, the police departments want to provide training, and the departments within this case study were very interested in having specialized training in various areas, but especially to better protect and serve their Muslim populations. But there's this financial constraint that they face, which becomes worse in tough economic times. As one police chief said, for whatever reason, the training of police officers does not seem to be a priority of the legislature as far as funding. We want to provide as much training as we possibly can, but almost all of the expense of training is borne by the individual municipality. Another key finding is counter-abuse techniques, and I'd love if there's some dialogue that we can have after the other panelists present on this issue. In speaking with all of the key informants from the Muslim community, including the religious leaders, and in speaking with those who have interacted closely with Muslim populations in the courts and from police departments, there tends to be abuse perpetrated. The way that it's similar in non-immigrant communities is that we know domestic violence is about power and control. What tends to be the impetus in based on this research for domestic violence it really looks more like discipline, and that if somebody didn't do what they were asked to do, or somebody did something that they weren't supposed to do. And again, we see that in domestic violence cases as it is, but really unique, and again, a lot of examples provided by those who work daily with Muslim victims of domestic violence is that the abuse is more like corporal punishment. and that there may be, understanding that, some counter-abuse techniques that we may be able to employ with Muslim perpetrators that may not work with non-immigrants, but it might be applicable to immigrants in general. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But one key informant from a Muslim community said, "For any reason, if you get in trouble with the law, the whole Muslim society looks down at you, saying, 'My God, you are not a moral citizen.' And you're afraid because in the community, the social status is more important than money and having good things in life. If you don't have social status, it means you are not a good person." That is huge to shift behavior. All of the community-based Muslim social service providers with whom I spoke, the imam, the religious leader from the Islamic Center, the past president, really talked about this being so major that it might be enough to change behavior, that people are so concerned about their personal reputation, about their family name, about potentially being deported, about losing their job, and that if this is violence that's perpetrated out of a different form of power and control, if it's learned behavior because it's more culturally accepted and you see it as being disciplined, that maybe interventions can be different than we see in non-immigrant communities. So that's something to think about, and I think there's some implications there for some further research. I think we're missing, number 6 below, you can't see it, but is the importance of outreach and partnerships. Oh, you can see it over there. Good. So this was really important, again, this goes to really the front-end approach of breaking down these barriers. One detective said, "As police, we try to do things ourselves and we don't let people in. We need to work together with others to find a way to help families instead of not being able to do anything. I really think it's a team approach that will give us the best result." Because of the cultural constructs unique in Muslim communities, because of this secondary abuse, these outreach and these partnerships are extremely important. And we'll talk a little bit about what some departments are doing in that regard. So if we go back to my central research question, what is the preparedness of local law enforcement in Middlesex County to address domestic violence in Muslim communities in a post-9/11 society? Preparedness is highly fragmented. What I did is I created this display. I'm not sure. Can people read it? If not, I can go over each one. Anyone in the back? Can you see that? Okay. You can see the X's though? So you can see, I guess you come over here. So these rubrics up here represent a number of types of preparedness. What I did is each police department has been coded to ensure their confidentiality. UPD stands for Urban Police Department 1, Urban Police Department 2, Urban Police Department 3, then Suburban Police Department 1, Suburban Police Department 2. Again, these are departments that have highly concentrated Muslim populations. There are 5 communities of 8 that were identified by the Department of Justice as having highly concentrated Muslim populations. So again, they're not just any departments that I selected them for a reason, and again, to make it really generalizable to Middlesex County. So if you look at the departments, you can see the scatteredness of preparedness shows that fragmentation that I talked about. So all of the police departments, with the exception of one, were familiar with their local Muslim population. For the police department that wasn't, it's just simply because they were really not aware. It tends to be a community where there's a lot of immigrants. And again, it's not always easy to identify if somebody's Muslim, right? You can't expect somebody to look at somebody and say that person's Muslim. So that was a challenge to that particular police department. So not an unwillingness, but just an incognizance. Only one police department, which is a suburban police department, has a formal relationship with the mosque. This is where the department engages the mosque, goes out, has spoken there, has done trainings with them, has put on different types of activities. 2 of the departments, which are both suburban police departments, are familiar with the local Muslim social service agency. So they know who to contact that might be able to provide this cultural, competent type of approach to the issue. You can see, though, only one department, which is, again, a suburban police department, has a formal partnership with the Muslim Social Service Program. In that department, they are able to utilize them in a lot of ways. They've utilized them to contact victims on the day after an incident, to follow up with them. They've utilized the organization to interpret 911 calls. They actually applied for a grant together to provide police training. So it's been a relationship that's been very helpful to this particular department in better serving the Muslim community. You can see that all the departments have a partnership with the local domestic violence organization. So again, that's the primary domestic violence program serving a particular catchment area. You can see only one department, which is an urban police department, has a formalized outreach program to the Muslim community. So there are efforts where this department actually goes out. They actually have a door-to-door campaign. They do a lot to engage the Muslim community. They have a basketball league, police basketball league, specifically for the Muslim population. You can see two of the departments, both urban departments, have immigrant dialogue forums similar to this. You can see only one of the departments, the suburban department, has domestic violence brochures in the language of the Muslims who live in that community. Two departments, one urban department and one suburban department, has their 209A domestic violence rights in the local languages of their Muslim population. You can see only one department has a Muslim police officer who speaks various languages of the communities that live in that particular setting. You can see that two of the departments, both suburban departments, have gone cultural awareness training in the last 5 years. None of the urban departments have done so. And you can see that none of the departments have what I would say is a culturally competent domestic violence policy. So again, it's very fragmented as seen by the scatteredness of the X's. And I would really say that the only uniformity is the fact that there are no cultural competent TV policies, and every police department has a relationship with the local domestic violence program. I think what's important when we look at this is to recognize that there are a lot of good things that police departments are embracing, and what gives us a good roadmap to addressing domestic violence in Muslim communities, if we can really condense all of this in aggregate and use it as a blueprint and share resources across departments. So some of the nuances that I found is that suburban police departments are better prepared than urban police departments. And there's different reasons for that. Less people live in suburban communities, so there's less crime. Police departments are able to allocate their resources in a different way. There's also less diversity. So in the suburban communities, you tend to, and even really in all the communities, the Muslim populations are a small percent of the total population of the communities within my case study. But for a suburb, there's much less diversity. So it's a matter of being able to, do training and outreach and provide services to one immigrant community as opposed to urban departments, which have multiple immigrant populations. It's also less costs. When you have less police officers, it doesn't cost as much to provide training. And there's less stakeholders. So, certainly when we talk about equity, equity comes down to public organizations engaging community partners, is that we want to make sure as public agencies that we're equitable in who we're collaborating with, that it's not just one particular agency. So when it's a smaller community, there's less stakeholders there to collaborate with. So in terms of policy recommendations, there are a number of policy recommendations that are in the study itself. I just pulled out some of the key ones. The first is the importance of robust outreach. And outreach really needs to be more than having relationships with the local mosque. I recommend that there really needs to be non-traditional outreach efforts that looks at other areas, both to make victims aware of their rights here in the United States, but also rights specific to immigrant populations, but also going back to those counter-abuse techniques, more loosely referred to as scare tactics, to educate abusers about the consequences of domestic violence and how it may have an adverse effect on them. So looking at places like immigrant learning centers, like ESL programs, like refugee assistance programs, these are opportunities to reach people as they're newly arrived to the United States. So again, it's an opportunity for both victims and abusers to receive information. Second recommendation is looking to develop an independent interpreter pool. This might be looking to use, technology to have interpreters from not Massachusetts, but maybe from other states. Again, going back to Massachusetts, we talked about there being 26 colleges and universities. There's also Hanscom Air Force Base. There's a resource there of potential interpreters, from the military or from academia, who are independent and may not be from the local communities. A continuum of police services is really important. This is what I refer to as adjustable policing. This is essentially trying to operationalize cultural competent practices. And the reason for that is, the reality is you can't approach a case of domestic violence in a Muslim community in the same way you would as, John Jones living on Main Street, in Weston. You have to account for the differences. If you don't account for the differences, it's not an equitable response. And again, I recognize the challenges of that, but this comes down to how you respond. Nobody is asking police officers to take their shoes off at the door. That's obviously a safety issue. But recognizing why you're unable to take your shoes off. And I understand that not every environment is going to present itself in a way where you can come in and stop and say, Assalamu alaikum, and say, I'm sorry for not being able to take my shoes off. But the little things that officers might be able to do to acknowledge that you understand the culture and you respect the culture could go a long way to building rapport with the individuals in the household. But that continuum of police services can't just stop. There really needs to be follow-through. To the extent possible, it's extremely important to have a female officer arrive on scene, even if that person's not a first responder. And the reality is that most Muslim women are not going to speak with a male police officer. The first thing police officers will do is separate the parties in a domestic violence case. They're trained to do that. That's what policy says. But a female victim is unlikely going to go in another room, may not be allowed to go in the other room, could go in the other room, but then there may be consequences afterwards where she could be harmed by his family or by the abuser for going in the other room. Even if the victim does go in the other room, it's unlikely that the police officer, if the officer is male, is going to get much information. There might be a police report written that says the victim recanted or the victim was evasive or the victim didn't look me in the eye. It is normal for a Muslim woman not to look a man in the eye, especially a person of authority, because it's a sign of disrespect. So understanding these things, and again, operationalizing police in a way that accounts for the differences. State support for police training is something to look at. There's a bill that was filed. I'm not sure the exact status of it at the time, but we might want to look to the way that municipal fire departments receive monies for training. And the way that occurs is through a surcharge on homeowners insurance. So municipal fire departments are receiving training monies, but municipal police departments aren't. So to the extent we can look at state aid to support police departments so that they can offer specialized training is important. Partnerships with Muslim social service organizations, again, extremely important. We talked about how one police department is able to use that to better respond. And then a task force of stakeholders, whether or not it's one of the police departments with a large Muslim population, whether or not it's the district attorney's office, bringing together police departments, imams, local programs, healthcare, social services to come together, maybe to meet quarterly, to share information, to debrief, to look at forecasting and demographic changes. Those things can happen so that there's a continued dialogue. So wrapping things up, again, preparedness requires a front-end and a back-end approach through outreach and through culturally competent policing, which is best achieved through training. Just because a public service exists doesn't mean that it's equitable. And I'm not suggesting that every police department, every municipality has to account for the litany of differences in a multicultural society. But what I am suggesting is that it's important for municipalities to look at the populations that are in a particular community and to also think about whether or not there are any of these externalities, such as 9/11, or such as the earthquake in Haiti that may impact the population in a way where they may require public services in a different way. Not doing so, again, it's not equitable. For policing to be equitable, again, it has to be adjustable. And I talked about these demographic changes and externalities that we can't ignore. So I think we're actually going to take questions after the other panelists have an opportunity to talk. So look forward to answering those questions and having some dialogue with you all.
That was very powerful data. Thank you, Sean. As we noted on the sign-in sheet, we are going to be sending out a lot of this material to you through email. And so as you leave, if you haven't checked off that you wanted to get these handouts, please go ahead and do so, so that you can get the abstracts, data. There's more material that we would like to present, and this is a way to do it. We'll also give you the link to the website so that you can download it on your own instead of getting an email. So there's other ways for you to get the material. So next on the program, we're going to have 3 community experts come out and talk about their experiences in relation to what Sean has presented. And so we're going to have each one come up and give a little presentation about their own work and their experience, and then we will conclude with a question and answer period, which will allow for you to ask for any one of the individuals to respond. We have one microphone, and that's tied to our television, so we are going to shift back and forth. So when you ask your questions, we'll be moderating that sort of. So first, I'd like to be introducing Naima Agulab. She is going to represent the Refugee and Immigrant Assistance Center from REAC. Naima has more than 12 years experience working at REAC, where she supervises and provides outreach, education, and direct services to Somalis. She's often called on by the hospital, court systems, schools, and shelters to consult on cases and provide technical assistance. In addition, Naima provides training to other human services professionals in the area, such as cultural competence, trauma, and Somali culture. Most recently, she's participated in a statewide project training law enforcement, domestic violence advocates, and others working with victims on understanding how best to work with African Muslim victims of domestic violence. In 2008, she received the Unsung Heroine from Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women for her outstanding contribution to the community. And in 2009, she received a letter of recognition from Boston's Mayor Menino for her outstanding service to the Somali community. So next, I'd like to invite Naima to the microphone.
Just I'll present my organization in 5 minutes and then ask any questions. I work at an organization called Refugee and Immigrant Assistance Center, founded in 1993. It used to call Somali Women and Children Association. Our mission is to promote cultural, educational, and socioeconomic development of the refugee and immigrant. To realize this, we provide a lot of services. One of the things that we offer is social adjustment services to provide extensive and much needed social service for the refugees when they arrive here. Community education and support, assistance for consultation and referral for the other social and the legal service providers. We assist the victim of the domestic violence, English as a second language, and job training referral and translation assistance. This is one of the pictures that we invite the community members in our office, and then social group support that we do in our office. Also, we do a parent education. I choose this picture to show you because it's the first time we partner for the police department in Boston that they come to our office and provide trainings for our parents when we get the teen violence and its impact of the Somali youth in Boston. And also we provide an African Women Network for safety, advocacy, protection for the MANSOP. We do training, which I came just now from Cambridge Health Alliance, and we've never been called for the police department, even though we offer our services to say that we provide these services, but the police never invite us to present our program there. And I hope for the police department in Somerville and Cambridge invite us again to do this training, because it's very impact of the providing services for the African Muslim victims. Also, we do English at the local mosque in Boston. Citizenship for the new American that we provide as a part of our continued effort to integrate in the society, to prepare citizenship exam and application. And we do girl leadership training. One of the things we try to empower our girls to educate about the building self-esteem, conflict solution, and health practice, such as safer sex and education around HIV and prevention. One of the main components of our organization is the refugee resettlement. We resettle more than 200 refugees from different countries, from Somalia, Vietnam, Burma, Congo, Ethiopia, Iraq, are resettled. And we resettle in Lynn and Worcester and Boston Greater. So in this slide, in 2003, we resettle more than 200 refugees around the country. We do a job readiness program, because a lot of refugees, when they come to this country, none of them, most of them, they didn't have to have an experience to work in the places that, this picture, it's first group that we set in the laundry, that they never seen a laundry place who came, refugees came from Nepal. We have a community counseling service that we provide counseling in our office. We have a psychology and psychiatrist in the office who is bilingual, bicultural clinicians. This is our one of the programs that we do, African Manis Health Initiative. We educate the African Manis about the issue surrounded about their health. This is our 3 offices, Boston, Worcester, and Lynn. Also, I want to introduce, this organization has been founded in 1993, immigrants women who came from Somalia. And we started in a small office in Boston, and now we have 3 places. And that woman who opened this organization and opened a lot of women in their, her office is Mariam Ahmed Gas, who's here, and I've been honored that she's here with me today.
We're very lucky to have these resources right here in the local area, and that you're able to come out to Somerville to talk with us. So thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Suad Akib. Suad is the Executive Director and founder of the American Arabic Association of Women, also known as AAAW. She's attended school in Morocco and Switzerland, and she's studied psychology in the University of at Mohammed V, Rabat, Morocco, as well as special education for mentally handicapped children at the University of Fribourg in Switzerland. Suad studied for a banking career at the New England College of Finance. She's a certified mental health first aid expert. Thank you, Suad, for coming.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I want to thank you, Sean, for all the work you did, that you did complete the whole thing. We don't have to say anything else. I want to thank Sonia for making this event happening, and the organization for everything, and the city of Somerville for hosting such an important event. I want to thank our mayor, the extraordinary mayor. I know he left, but he's so good to us. He's #1 supporter of human rights in the city of Malden, and he supports the community of Muslim and Arab people in the city of Malden. And the chief, Mr. Police, Mr. Mallis, he does a good job too with our community. He speaks Arabic, and he knows a lot about the Arab culture. And I would like to thank our Imam, Mr. Abdelhamid Borot. He's the founder of the Outreach Community Center, the first Islamic and Arabic center in the city of Malden. Thank you. And not just that, he's a good listener to women and battered women and men, both of them. And of course, I want to thank our group, AAAW team. Thank you for being here. And thanks to everyone who gave us some time to come and listen to us. So like I said, Sean said it all, but I will say a little bit more. So the American Association for Arab Women is a nonprofit organization that was founded by a group of Arab intellectual people. Our main goal is to empower Arab women to be leaders in their families, communities, in American society. They achieve this through becoming knowledgeable on their rights, making informal issues, fostering networks and opportunities, sustaining an organizational community, learning the necessary communication skills, and overcoming cultural and language barriers. Women are the core of families and strengthen our community. Since the opening of our organization, we have taken notice of the increasing domestic violence issues. This type of violence can take many forms, such as controlling, intimidation, neglect, and economic deprivation. It is defined as abuse of mind, body, or spirit. This is a crime that affects all communities, regardless of their faith or background. Today, in our gathering, we are talking about violence specifically in Arab and Muslim community. It has been condemned by national and international law and the Shura Council that domestic violence is an absolute violation of the teaching of Islam. Neither the Holy Quran or Sunnah recognize justice, fairness, and equality as the core values of Islam and reject domestic violence in all its forms. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "None but a noble man treats women in honorable manner, and none but dishonorable man treats women disgracefully." The Holy Quran clearly advocates against domestic violence, promoting harmony and affection between husband and wife. Islam is a peaceful and merciful faith that highly respects women. The acceptance of domestic violence in the Muslim and Arab communities is taught when it's demonstrated at home. Young girls are pressured to behave with the lingering threat of punishments, and the severity of this said punishment causes both physical and psychological damage, while invoking a sense of fear toward fathers, brothers, or any other male figures. While living in these conditions, it is understood that these acts are normal, and in some cases, it is what love or family means. In Arab and Islamic countries, domestic violence is not yet considered as a major concern, despite its increasing frequency and life-threatening consequences. Arab and Muslim societies teach that family matters are private. Family reputation is important, and family solidarity is their foundation. With this mindset, it seems that reaching out for legal services will break these boundaries. And this is why the legal approach for assistance toward Arab battered women as a crime is rejected. Domestic violence is considered a justifiable response to misbehavior. In many ethnic communities, divorce is often looked down upon, and victims usually face pressure to remain a part of the unhealthy relationship. The female gender viewed as the stronghold that is remain demeaned, speechless, and tolerant of this violent situation in order to keep the family together. The ongoing ignorance of domestic violence, is it how it looks, that ways families are affected, continues to plague our Arab and Muslim communities. But today we are fortunate to live in America, There is so many organizations that provide services to victims of domestic violence. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. It is very helpful to have you put it, also the information into a context that teaches the Quran's beliefs on the subject. So I think that's very helpful. So thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce our final panelist, Salita Mehta. Salita has 2 master's degrees in English literature and world history. She is the part-time domestic violence advocate at Saheli, which is a Burlington-based domestic violence agency that works to empower South Asian women and families to lead a healthy and safe lives. Salita joined Saheli in 2010 after completing a domestic violence training through a Concord, Bedford-based domestic violence agency. In her 3 years as an advocate, Salita has served approximately 150 clients, both South Asian and mainstream. Saheli's South Asian clients include about 10% Muslim women from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. So next I'd like to invite you to come up. I'm going to reorient the space just so that she can... No, you'll be fine? Okay.
So thank you everybody for being here. I'd like to say right off the bat, I'm not an expert. I've just started in this field. My background is children's textbook publishing. I've been with Saheli for about 3 years. And as Sonia said, we basically serve the South Asian population. We are an agency that was created in 1996 by a few volunteers, and it's an offshoot of the Indian Association of Greater Boston. We are associated with ICC and the Indian American Forum for Political Education. We're mostly volunteer, 99% volunteer, with about 3 part-time staff people. And it is our intent to educate and empower South Asian women in order for them to have a healthy family life. We've started a couple of new, we've done citizenship training, ESL classes, driving classes. We have computer classes ongoing, a support group for some of our clients. And we are starting a mental health initiative in which we'll be doing about 4 or 5 workshops next year that will include the impact of mental health on the DV population and the children and families. And we also launched our men's initiative, which we've just started, but we're hoping for a lot from there. We launched it at Boston College, and we hope to have 1,000 pledges by the end of the year for men to create awareness in their communities and teach other men within the community about domestic violence and techniques and ways of handling it that they haven't been taken care of so far. So we provide services to about 10 to 12% Muslim women, mainly from India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. India, the subcontinent, the South Asian group of countries, has about 16 languages, and we have members in our membership who speak almost all of these languages. So we are called by shelters to help interpret for Bangladeshis. We have Bengali speakers. For Pakistanis, Afghanis, we don't have any Dari or Pashto speakers in our group, so we have to move them on to other agencies, and there's also the confidentiality issue involved in that situation. So it would be fantastic, Sean, to have a directory of interpreters. I've had a few calls to translate for, from the shelters to translate for Afghani speakers, and also for Arab speakers. And I've so far not been able to identify, and these ladies, I'm sure I'll be in touch with you, we haven't been able to identify people in this state who speak those languages, and through research we have found people from DV organizations who understand the issues and the confidentiality involved in here, who speak Abdari, who speak Pashto, who speak some of the Arabic languages. We have also been contacted by shelters, and it takes hours and hours to translate for these women because there's a question of trust. When shelter workers ask for their documents, they don't trust them enough to hand over important documents. And then this has to be explained to them. Every word has to be translated. We have been involved with a few, and I'm going to move the conversation to the shelter end of things, right? Law enforcement, since we're working in suburban areas and only 10 to 12% of our clients are Muslim, law enforcement generally within the suburban areas, we service all of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and we get calls as well from Pakistan and Bangladeshi. Law enforcement has generally been helpful. Okay, we have not had, as far as the women are concerned, the police have come through and helped extricate them from their homes in order to get them into shelters, and given them information and referral to service organizations that can help them with translation, that can lend them the emotional support that they need, right? So in those areas, the police have been very helpful. Clients who are calling us usually we give them money if they're in a situation where they need help, although our resources are very limited, both in terms of advocates and people who are available to work, and financial positions. We give them legal information, mainly about pro bono legal aid within these suburban areas, immigration, green card, U visa, and help them with the job search, help them to access English language classes. What happens here is that mostly, and this, I just want to say one sentence here, that Sujata Warrior, who wrote the, she wrote the cultural competency presentation for APII, and she states there that all cultures are contradictory. Values can be both oppressive and nurturing at the same time. So keeping that in mind, we see that South Asians and Muslims socialize both genders to put the family first. They have very little room for individuality. It's got to be the community, the family, and the religion. All of these come first. So when the youngsters are confused, or the women are going through emotional abuse, financial abuse, they're required to bring, even if firstly they're not allowed to work. If they are allowed to work, they're required to put their checks in a joint account to which they have no access. So generally, they may be in good jobs, but they generally have no money in their pocket. Their husbands take them shopping, and the wives are expected to be very grateful and to feel, and the wives do feel loved because the husbands are taking them out to shop. So all these issues, as you said, there's love, there's financial, who will protect me. The males have been socialized to believe that they are the protectors, and the women also believe that of them, so they allow themselves to be dominated to a certain extent, right? Because this is the culture, this is the socialization. Each gender plays a role. And then when you're living in these large families, elders have authority. Everybody, and the young wife who comes in is supposed to uphold family honor, izzat, don't wash your linen in dirty linen in public. All of these things are holding these women back from understanding that what they're going through is not right. They don't even think about their rights as a human being. That doesn't even come into the picture. It's only when they contact law enforcement or DV service providers that they understand that there's such a thing as the Bill of Rights, that we tell them about. And mainly when they call or we contact them, they contact us. There's confusion, there's fear, there's shame, there's guilt, all of those emotions, but there's confusion. Is it my fault? Am I supposed to be calling you? And then they're calling from, it's very hard for them to find private places to call from, because if that conversation is heard, there is going to be disciplinary action, like you said. Not just from the husband, but from parents, etc. And there are two more areas I wanted to bring up. In the shelters, the few cases that we have worked with, we have found that women go into the shelters. One issue that comes up, if they're here on dependent visas, they have access to shelters, but they have no money to buy food because they're not eligible for public benefits. And that is a huge problem. So then they go back, because after a few weeks, they'll go back because they got a roof over their heads, but they have no money to feed their children and themselves. And all of the time is spent in doing that. And we hear them, they tell us that they're going back. The second issue is that a few of the cases we have dealt with, women have gone into a shelter. The police have spent hours trying to get them into a shelter, to extricate them from homes, get them into shelters. A whole team of people has worked with them to get them to safety. And what happens after a few weeks, somehow, because of the intimate connection in the family, the girls are talking to their own fathers, because their own father is also very highly respected and loved by them. And somehow, because of the family connections, the husband gets to know, and he starts talking. And then he gives his whole spiel about how much I love you, whatever, and they go back home. What happens after that, we don't know, because we have no more contact left. And they go back to those very dangerous situations, but to them, the feeling of protection and love that's coming from the husband is, at that time, becomes more attractive than living in a shelter where they feel that they've lost control of themselves, because there are rules and regulations to be obeyed, and sometimes, you're not allowed to use a phone, and that disconnects the line between themselves and their parents. And so the final thing I wanted to talk about was this issue we have had never any direct contact with, but calls from relatives and at one point it was a bath of young Muslim girls who had been beaten, obviously beaten and literally kidnapped from their homes and taken back to the country of origin to be married to a cousin back there, because of this whole issue of honor. The girl holds the reputation and the honor of the family in her hands, and yet she was dating in one case dating an American. And she was threatened, beaten, and they were taken back. The girls themselves never actually contacted us. This is one area where it needs collaboration to address the situations these girls in. It's a very, very difficult area because you don't know how to deal with, you can't encourage them to leave, you don't know how to deal with the parents. I myself am not Muslim, so it's a little, it's a very sensitive issue. Very few of us who are working on this at Saheli are Muslim, so it's a very sensitive issue for us to deal with. And with that, we have some brochures out there. I apologize for not having a PowerPoint presentation because this was last minute, and thank you very much to all of you for listening. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Salita, and the Saheli organization. We have now heard from 3 panelists as well as a researcher. And so just to recap a little bit, through the panelists, we've heard programming that's available to our agencies, to our police departments, to our government through experts. We heard the Muslim religious true teachings on domestic violence, which helps to give us a perspective that's more oriented to the truth of how religion can be used against people and their own personal faith to utilize an individual's power over them. And as well as the case gaps that we are finding from the experts, from the police and the services where the survivors of domestic violence from the Muslim and Arab communities, what are the service gaps, as well as the recommendations that we have from our researcher. I'm going to pull up that screen right now so that we can just kind of keep that on our mind as we're going to head towards our question and answer period, as well as I'm going to call up our panelists to sit here. We have, again, 1 microphone, so we'll be calling people up. So if you can ask your question, I'll repeat it, and if you could say who are you aiming that question towards, that will help us to facilitate this next portion. I wanted to take also a moment to let you know that what we're doing here today is our monthly meeting of the Immigrant Police Dialogue Session. And normally it's held the second Monday of the month. Because of the holiday, we put it past 1 week. So normally we would be on the preceding Monday, but that's what this group is. It's an opportunity for the police and the immigrant community to come together to have a very healthy and fruitful conversation and to highlight some of the opportunities. And the Chief of Police, Tom Pasquarello, co-facilitates that with me, and I'm representing the Human Rights Commission, the Multicultural Affairs Commission. And just a brief moment about the Office of Somerville Commissions. Our work is to facilitate the interconnections between agencies, communities, and the government. We facilitate the Human Rights Commission to do case management and investigations on human rights, as well as help facilitate the Multicultural Affairs Commission and the Women's Commission when the case revolves around a variety of different kinds of folks in the issue. We also do community engagement, helping to try to bring in the diverse person, the marginalized, the vulnerable, or people who just aren't connected into the community, to bring them into the government, as well as we represent and work collaboratively with the Commission for Women, the Human Rights Commission, the Multicultural Affairs Commission, and we have the LGBT liaison in the office. And some of the things that we have been doing is the police dialogue session. We do awareness events, such as the recent domestic violence vigil. We conduct trainings with government, with the police and the fire department, as well as we participate and help facilitate when it's possible, task forces and teams. So that's some of the work that we do. And so next I would like to just have us take an opportunity to ask these experts. They're in our room, the doors are shut, so they're stuck here with us. So let's take advantage of their expertise and ask our questions. Again, I'm going to repeat the question, and then I'll have whoever you're aiming the question to come up here, and they'll respond from the microphone. So questions? Yes, Representative Provo.
Thank you. At one point in Sean McMaster's excellent presentation, he talked about the importance of operationalizing culturally competent practices, and yet I think there was only one of the departments that he surveyed that had culturally competent policies. How do you get to the formation of the policies and then the operationalization of that cultural competence?
Sean, I have you come here.
And anyone else?
So the question from the representative is, how do you really operationalize a cultural competent approach to addressing domestic violence in Muslim communities, recognizing that most of the departments, as part of this case study, well, really only 2 have had cultural competent or trainings that focus on the issue of cultural competency. So the first, I think, is just recognizing, again, that it's a different community, so this is where, adaptable or adjustable policing is important. I talked a little bit about, not being able to separate the parties, but other things like having a male police officer take a photo. I mean, that's not going to be allowed. It might also be very difficult in order to identify physical signs based on the attire that a person is wearing. So I think first we have to acknowledge that that domestic violence presents itself very differently, and that the standard approaches to separating the parties and interviewing and taking photographs of the scene and canvassing the apartment complex and trying to talk to others who may be from that same community are going to present different challenges. So I think that's the first thing, is that recognition. I think the second thing is understanding approaches that are probably the most effective to training police officers, and that's probably having a Muslim police officer train other police officers. I think the reality, and a lot of, I think, police officers will admit this, is that hearing another police officer from that community would probably be the best way to train them. That's not because they understand the constraints that police officers face. They understand the dangers of walking into a household. But I think doing it in partnership, so whether or not maybe that's bringing in a police officer from a local community here who is Muslim, bringing somebody from another state like Michigan. Again, I think this is where grants come in, where you might be able to bring someone. Michigan has the largest Muslim population in the United States. The Dearborn Police Department has multiple Muslim police officers. I think utilizing a Muslim police officer, but doing it in partnership with organizations represented here today. So that way, we're ensuring that police officers are hearing from other police officers, but they're also aware of the local resources. I think the other thing is looking at domestic violence policies, and I mentioned that none of the police departments have what I would consider a cultural competent domestic violence policy. But I don't blame the departments, because if you look at the state policy, there is no mention of cultural competency or even a recognition of immigrant communities. So that's a concern, because most police departments, or I should say all police departments, model their policy after the EOPS policy at the state level. So and again, we have to give our police departments credit. They know how to respond, and based on the environment into which they walk, adjust. But policies exist for a reason, and training exists for a reason. And I think, we see that whenever police respond to any type of emergency, the first thing that kicks in is their training. So that training counts for something, but so does the policy. So I think we need to look at the state policy and first look at that, which would then be a model that local departments can adjust. The other thing is, I would suggest that there needs to be an addendum to the state domestic violence policy that recognizes that Massachusetts is a state with a large immigrant population. Middlesex County alone has close to 17% immigrants living in the county. Massachusetts, I think, is about 14.5%. So when you look at that, we have to realize that we have immigrant communities here, and we could have an addendum to the state policy that has certain types of more specific information about particular communities, whether or not it's Muslim, or whether or not it's Brazilian, or whether or not it's Haitian, or Cambodian or Vietnamese, from which a police department can actually take and utilize within their own department. So I think there can be broad-based cultural competency language in a policy, but then I think there can be addendums that are adopted at the state level from which police departments can pluck and use within their own departments and do training. So, but I welcome anybody else's thoughts on it too. Does that answer your question, Representative? Okay.
What I can add, there is really I can add that there is a lack of languages. Sometimes you need someone to do interpretation. You won't find one. There is a big problem, communication problem, even translation, a lot of things. Like if we start just with the language, that would be a big thing. Thank you.
I'm going to take Alex in the back, and then I'll go to Ilana. And
I'm just curious. I know that although it's a very heterogeneous community by language and country of origin, there's a cohesiveness in the Muslim community that's different from some of our other communities. And I'm wondering, in terms of the 9/11 effect, if the surveillance and infiltration on the part of the New York City police infiltration units have had an effect on how people relate to the police here in Massachusetts.
Start, but I think that this is a good question for our community participants. So Alex referenced the New York City Police Department, which has a large counterterrorism unit. It's the largest in the country. I think it's about 265 police officers devoted specifically to working in the communities across the state of New York and with federal and state law enforcement partners to identify and combat potential acts of terrorism. I do think it's an issue, and based on my research, it's played itself out in the following way, is that a lot of immigrants are just not familiar with our federalist system, so they don't tend to differentiate between local law enforcement, state law enforcement, and federal law enforcement. So I think that goes back to the outreach and the training and trying to demystify the criminal justice system and law enforcement in general. So I think there's a tendency to see things like that and hear things like that, and again, if you can't differentiate between federal law enforcement and local law enforcement, and you have concerns about potentially being deported or detained, why would you contact local law enforcement if you're a victim of domestic violence? So I think that's a reality, and that's been, I think, an unintended consequence of the militarization of some departments. And we don't see that in Massachusetts, but in other states. And I think it's played itself out in working towards this post 9/11 society. So.
In Massachusetts, throughout the years, I've been working with the refugees and immigrants. In the police sense, I never seen complaint about profiling issues, but in the airport, when they arriving from the country, I traveled 2011 in Africa with my kids, in London actually, and when I come back, they ask where I come from, which mosque I pray, which tribe I am. And my son says that time, he said, I'm 16 years old, so whichever mosque I pray, how gonna affect whatever things that you wanna know about me? My son asked that. So in terms of airport, we've seen a lot of hustle, and we found out even in New York, it's better than Logan Airport for the refugees and immigrants when they travel back to where they come from, because they take destination in New York, then they get a local airplane to come Massachusetts. But in terms of the police, Massachusetts is better than other states that I talk to the refugees.
Ileana.
I'm curious, what have you found was helpful for people in the three different immigrant societies or the other immigrant societies that you are serving to break down the barriers and actually reach out to come for help? What was helpful for them to actually get out of the cultural and that piece of, like, you cannot really get out of your family, you cannot launder your dirty laundry outside. What made a difference?
So the question, I'm going to have you go ahead, come on up here, come to me, and I'm going to respond, or give the question, and then I'll, hold on one second. So the question was, what was helpful from agencies that has made the difference? So they just, now you can go to the mic.
So from our particular agency, outreach, we're reaching out to Muslims within our communities. And the other thing that I think for our particular agency is, even though there aren't very many who are of the same religion, within our group, the culture is the same. The traditions are the same. The foods are the same. And when you can speak the language, it makes a lot of difference. But initially, they want to be affirmed and assured that what's happening is not right. And the way they're thinking is right. And they have a right to a lot of things that they're not getting out of their families and their fathers, etc. So we start from that premise and then go on to a certain, risk and things like that. We have people who call us, get one little bit of information and then say, I have to go. Then you may not be able to contact them, and it's dangerous for them to contact them unless they themselves pick up the phone, and they may not call you for maybe a year. Then they'll come back. And some of the cases, some of the women who came to us were when they were in a lot of them actually had been abandoned, were found wandering around their city, the streets of their town, without clothes, without shoes on, beaten and broken. And then the police went and extracted them from there. This happened in several cases. Extracted them, put them in shelters, and then the DV officers at the police department contacted us to talk to them, give them the emotional support and do the translation. Does that answer your question? Okay, so it's at the last, it's at the end. Before that, they doubt their own gut reaction to what is happening.
Throughout the years, what has helped me personally was having a holistic approach of the whole situation about what the clients need. So the clients may be in danger or have a domestic violence situation, but it's not her first priority. Her priority could be looking at housing for her. Her priority could be having a school system that she could find a good place that the kids can go to school. Then when I fulfill that information or help her, then she will come out and talk about the domestic violence issues. And having a space that they can talk to anything and its confidentiality is the most important things in our culture. So having a space that can protect their information, also educate them without violating, because one of the things they value is the religion. So if I'm coming from the religion perspective, if I'm coming from the culture perspective, then she will trust me without looking in the eye of the other way that the other system is looking of the situation.
We have enough time for one more question, and I know that I had my friend back there in the audience waiting patiently. Thank you.
Being a Muslim, I can tell you with 100% certainty that customs and traditions differ from one Muslim country to another. So certain things that are appropriate in a Muslim country in Asia would be appropriate probably in North Africa. It's different. So going back to police officers having to take off their shoes when they enter certain Muslim households is a matter of tradition and not of, it's not Islamic at all. So where you really need to take off your shoes by respect is in the house of prayer, which is the mosque, not inside. Because that could be a safety issue for police officers as well, having to pursue somebody outside or having to worry about, tying their shoes back on and stuff like that. The other thing is language. Arabic is the main language, but it has several dialects. I cannot put a number on them. That's why there's a big lack of communication when an Arabic-speaking person seeks help from an organization where there are non-Arabic speaking people. First thing they do, call an interpreter hotline and get you an Arabic interpreter. You have to keep in mind that you got to get somebody who speaks that dialect, because not everybody went to school, and unless you go to school, you would not be able to understand classical Arabic, which is standard Arabic, which would be understood across the board in the Muslim world. So you might find somebody who's like Egyptian getting a Moroccan interpreter, or vice versa. So misinterpretation would occur. So I always advise, people at the level of courts and things like that, they should be able to know about nonprofit organizations throughout the state that are specialized in a certain type or certain dialect of Arabic that's going to suit the needs of the victim who's approaching them. And I just hope that, going back to Logan Airport, I'm sorry, Sanita, right?
Yeah, you.
Oh, sorry. There is a problem. There have been several complaints about profiling at Logan Airport. Things you see now that we used never to see before 9/11. There's what we call BAU, behavioral analysis units. They just take screeners, basic screeners sometimes that are lacking correct and right training, and they put them as profilers throughout the airport. I read an article where there have been several problems generating from this lack of training from the part of TSA, and I guess their FSD is actually now addressing that. So you are not the only one because of how you look. I'm a Muslim. I don't wear the same clothes you do wear. I'm originally from Morocco, but I was a victim of profiling once, and at Logan Airport. So don't feel bad. Thanks for listening.
So I think that was a good point, and I think again it goes back to the recognizing the diversity of Islam. And I talked about Middlesex County and what Middlesex County looks like. So the research study certainly again is generalizable to the county, but it doesn't account any differences for the Southeast Asian Muslim community or for Middle Eastern communities. The research is really focused on North African, East African, South Asian communities. So I think it's a good point that you made, and I think this goes back to what the representative said about operationalizing. It's important for police departments to know their communities, to know the countries of origin, to know what the dialects of those countries are, to have the relationships, as the young lady said, to know who to contact from the local service providers. So I do think when we talk about the issue, we can't really be broad and generalize. We have to understand the diversity of the religion. So.
I know that lots of hands started to rise just as I was starting to say that we're coming to a summation. So that is proof that we were able to reach one of our goals, which was to excite everybody's thoughts and ideas and continue this dialogue. And so I strongly invite, encourage, and support you to contact all of our experts. And we had so many agencies in the audience today coming from so many different places, and I'm grateful for all of your support in the work that the community is doing. So I wanted to thank our honored Imam, Mayor from Malden, and the Chiefs of Police from Somerville and Malden as well, Deputy Chief Fallon, Representative Denise Provo, Representative Sortino's office as well, and the work that we get supported through Mayor Curtatone and the events that we're able to put together through the Office of Somerville Commissions. And thanks for the support of the Women's Commission for helping helped to organize the room and make sure that this is happening. To our honored guests, our researcher, Sean McMaster, and sharing his research for his dissertation from UMass Boston, and to Salita and Naima and Suad, coming from our amazing agencies of REAC and Saheli, and and I know I have to remember, I wrote it down, REAC, Saheli, and American Association of Arabic Women. Again, if you haven't signed up for the electronic material that we will send to the audiences who are interested, please do so on your way out. We have the abstract from the paper. We have more information about the teachings of Islam and how it's not supporting domestic violence, it supports truth and honor. And there's a lot more information available. So thank you everyone for coming and continue the dialogue.